It is no surprise to anyone that keeping pets is one of life's greatest joys. And this can make saying goodbye to our pets one of the hardest moments any of us has to face. Pet loss grief is real. It's all too common, and it can be extremely difficult to navigate skillfully. I'm so grateful that the MSPCA-Angell has a social work program led by Julie Gass. This program is relatively rare in veterinary medicine. Julie joins us to share more about how our social work service helps all of us, from the MSPCA-Angell veterinarians and staff to pet lovers like you and me, how it helps us manage the highs and the lows of sharing our lives with pets. So Julie, with that, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Neil, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. I agree, this is a very powerful, like pet loss is a very powerful thing that people experience, and our animals mean so much to us. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to all of you about what we do in our department. And then also my hope is that it may provide some comfort or some validation to those of you out there who have suffered from pet loss and didn't know what to do with yourselves, or whoever out there is struggling right now caregiving for a sick pet. And then also ultimately in the future, I hope for you to have some tools to use when you do eventually go through this. So thank you again for joining. This is a privilege, and I'm happy to talk to you. So what I'm going to do today is give you a very general overview, because I think the most important thing is that we have a really fruitful Q&A later. So I could talk about this all day long, but I'm going to just do more of a broad discussion on what we do. So first, I'm just going to give a little introduction to mine and Michelle's background. Michelle is the other social worker that is here in this department. Then I'm going to talk about how we support our clients. Then how we support our staff, and maybe if there's time, a little bit into how social work impacts or intersects with vet med, and the ways it can influence and innovate it as we go forward into the future. So for starters, the team, it's me and Michelle. Often people come to us, and especially here in the lobby, we get some curious people come in and they had never even heard of this position before, and are happily surprised that we're here. And next slide, please. So essentially, it is something that I myself found out about by accident. My own history is as a social worker in human medicine. So I did oncology social work and then hospice social work. And then it was just a natural segue into working here in animal medicine. Similarly to Michelle, she was working in grief and loss. And for the most part, a lot of her career was in animal medicine, but in more of a supportive role. And she went back to school and got her social work degree because she saw what a need there was for this resource in the public. Next slide, please. And so what we do and why my background and Michelle's backgrounds are so important is because a lot of what happens in pet loss and pet care care for pets who have serious illness is trauma, grief, and often that really highly affects us when our pets are sick or when ultimately they pass away. So, so in terms of helping out our caregivers at Angell, we do a few things. There are obviously many different unique circumstances that we help with. If there's any social workers out there, you probably know that our field is considered kind of like a rabbit out of the hat field, where we help with impossible situations and try to come up with the best solution. And similarly, that happens here in our lobby and with our clients. But to generalize, we help caregivers with a few things in a couple of different circumstances. The first would be caregiver support for long-term and serious illness and people who are taking care of their pets in those situations. And then also people who find out that their pet is sick and end up in a crisis here at the hospital. And then ultimately, we do the kind of the continuum of care into bereavement support once your pet passes away. So I'll first start with what happens when we're counseling caregivers whose pets are facing serious illness. And a lot of times that encompasses treatment and euthanasia decisions, quality of life decisions. I'm sure, as you all know, our pets are our rocks. They're the cornerstone of our well-being. Sometimes they are who get us through the day. And when we adopt them, when they come into our families, we're signing up to protect them forever. We don't really think that it's going to end. So when you first adopt a pet, you're thinking of the walks you're going to take them on, the adventures you're going to have. And then when serious illness and loss start coming into it, oftentimes, as also with human medicine, we're not very well prepared for that. And a lot of that, I think, comes from us as human beings feeling like we have more control than we really do when it comes to serious illness and loss. And we can be really hard on ourselves, despite everything we're doing to make sure our pets are comfortable and happy. And so when somebody is going through a long-term illness with their pet, whether it's oncology, whether it's, say, congestive heart failure or kidney disease, you are essentially living day to day, thinking about your pet, taking care of them. You're on med schedules. You are trying to figure out how to make them comfortable and happy while they're there with you. And a lot of times that comes with guilt and feeling like you're not doing enough, because we love our pets so much. And we're not used to this. They don't make a manual for end of life. So what we're doing is winging it and doing it the best we can with what we have. So Michelle and I, we provide counseling and support to clients who are really struggling with the anxiety, the isolation, the depression, and the coming to terms with that your time is now limited with your best friend, your baby, your companion. And that brings up a lot for people. And it certainly brings up what we call anticipatory grief. And that's what I consider living in the gray. You know that your time is limited. You don't know when it's going to happen. And every day you're looking for signs from your pet that this might be it, that this might be the time. And so what we do is we provide a very empathetic and caring environment for people to be able to talk about what they're going through. And we validate how hard it is. And we do what's called companioning, which is we're not offering solutions, because really when it comes to end of life and serious illness, a lot of times the solutions really aren't there anymore. And it's more about celebrating your pet's life, appreciating the moments that you still have with them, and then overcoming the guilt and being hard on yourself that you're not doing enough when truly you are. And I say this because so many times I work with people who have built a ramp to get down their stairs for their pets so they can go outside with dignity and use the bathroom. Or they are, hand feeding their pet, baby food, or searching, searching like Chewy or the grocery store for food that they're still willing to eat. And so in this sense, people are doing the best they can to take care of their pets, but still feeling like they can't, and beating themselves up for that. So along with that comes another scenario, which is when you wake up in the morning and maybe your pet is limping, or they essentially maybe haven't eaten in a few days, and you come into our hospital thinking, okay, we're going to get some medicine and then we're going to go home. And then what happens is that you hear a really difficult diagnosis or prognosis that maybe either you only have a few days to weeks left with your pet, and or maybe just a few hours. And that truly turns a person's life upside down. Going back to what we were saying earlier, they're our cornerstones of our well-being. And they help us even be with ourselves, right? A lot of us don't even want to be alone with ourselves, and pets make that better. So when that ends up in danger, or when that ends up becoming like that's not going to happen anymore, that we're going to lose them, it really hits us hard. And a lot of times here in when people find that on the lobby, I would say that I would feel comfortable considering that a traumatic experience. And with that comes a feeling of floating or uncontrollable crying or just extreme sadness, certainly confusion, because you just did not expect this, and then suddenly your world is turning upside down. And it's a scary, lonely place to be in because, as I mentioned earlier, we signed up for the wonderful walks. We signed up for, for having adventures, but we really didn't understand the weight of what this will feel like when it starts to happen. So what Michelle and I do here is, first we help people attend to just their basic needs, like really just reeling yourself back in and being able to process everything that's happening. And usually we do this by just getting you some water, giving you a quiet space to think and to cry, and then just giving you the space and time to think through what just happened. And we also provide an objective presence where we can help people think through things from a perspective that isn't full of loss. So when people in those moments have to make a quality of life decision or a euthanasia decision, when you thought that you were really just going to grab your baby back and go home and everything was going to be okay and safe, and then suddenly you know that you're going to be going home alone that night, we help you figure out how to get through that. We help you figure out how to cope with that. And we also help you make the decisions that down the line you'll feel okay about. Because ultimately, not many people walk away from a euthanasia decision without feeling a tremendous sense of loss and not feeling like you did enough, or even that you've betrayed your pet in some capacity. And we're the ones here to tell you that you did everything you could. And not only that, but what you're doing now is fulfilling the agreement and the bond that you made with your pet when you first brought them into your family. And that is to make sure they are safe. And sometimes safe means putting out, like helping them with their suffering. And that just feels wrong to us, even though it absolutely is the right thing to do. So then we also help with bereavement support. So after you've been through all of this, we provide short-term counseling for people to really just process everything that they've been through. With grief and loss, there is kind of a healing and a shift that happens from focusing on their death and being able to move into celebrating your life with them. Because ultimately, whatever happens in the lobby or whatever decision you make in the euthanasia room, that really ultimately impacts your grief. And a lot of times it creates a guilt that isn't true, because guilt comes along with, say, the bargaining phase of grief. And that is feeling like you had more control at the time than you did. And there's the shoulda, woulda, coulda, as I call them. That's thinking if you had done something differently, if you had seen a symptom sooner, that your pet would be there with you. So we help people resolve these feelings and help get them to a place where they celebrate their lives with their pets. And not only that, but really able to tell yourselves that that you did do everything you could, and that your pet loved you to the end, and you did not betray them. So that is a lot of what we do. So we have the counseling, and then we also have a grief support group. Pet loss is what's called a disenfranchised grief. And some of you out there probably have experienced this yourselves, where when your pet is sick or when they're going to pass, people well-intending, with good intentions, they're telling you, well, you can get another dog, or you can get another cat, or another bird. And in reality, you don't want any of that. You want your baby. You want your best friend. You want the person, the being that shared all of your secrets, all of your insecurities with you. It's so much more than that. And so with our pet loss support group, people can come together and share their lives with their pets and feel comfortable talking about what the pain that they're feeling. And even 6 months, 7 months, a year in, it's still okay to be feeling that way. It's still okay to be sad that your pet passed away. It's still okay to cry when you talk about them. And there we share with each other and support each other in a very empathetic space. And we also have a Facebook group too, where people can memorialize their pets online, or talk about things that are painful, like triggers, maybe anniversaries, birthdays, things like that. anything to really just validate your experience. And so other things we do is we develop some resources for adults and for kids. A lot of times pet loss is something that kids are experiencing death or grief for the first time. And parents often kind of put their own needs aside and want to focus on what their kids are going through. And it is such a painful thing to see your kids or to know that you're introducing something difficult into your child's life. And what we do is help you get the resources or tools to turn this into something where they are learning how to handle loss and grief. And those are things they can take them with them as they go through their lives. So these are just some things, some general ways that we help out people. And I think I have time for a very quick little story as an example of what we do. There was a client who was long-term care with one of our departments, and her pet was going through a serious illness over the course of several years. And over time, staff realized that she was starting to forget about appointments, or sometimes she would come late, or she would show up saying she got lost. And then it became clear that she was having trouble remembering what had been told to her during like the treatment process, maybe forgetting meds that she was supposed to give and things like that. So not only were they concerned about just her pet getting her care, but also the well-being of this client and just, is she safe? Is she okay at home? And so they called me in, and together we just had a very honest conversation with her, and come to find that she had been diagnosed with dementia, and was really just doing the best she could to make sure her pet was okay while she herself was suffering. And one of the things that I just really love about this organization and being a community hospital is that we just joined with her and figured out how to get her and her pet through this. And that was helping her out with transportation, like figuring out how to get there and back with her pet, figuring out how to remind her of appointments, whether it's calling her morning of, sending her emails, and then figuring out also how she could absorb and retain the information we were giving her for taking care of her dog. And ultimately, she got through several years with her pet, and we all came together when it was time for her pet to pass, and we were with her in that. And then we also came up with resources for her to help her cope with her grief, and to help her join with her community with memory loss programs and things like that. So maybe she wasn't alone when she was at home anymore. So I think that's just a beautiful story that kind of shows how we can take care of people and their pets through the continuum of their work with us. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, we can go past that. That was, sorry, thank you. So support for staff. The people that work here work extremely hard. A lot of people that get into caregiving professions, whether if it's human or animal meds, they're all empathetic. They all care deeply, and people choose this work because they're choosing to live by their values. And so because of that, it also becomes a stressful job and something that people can take home with them. So there is a high risk for compassion fatigue in this profession. And our role here is to provide the counseling and resources that people need to be able to show up every day and live their best lives, and then also take care of our clients and our patients. Compassion fatigue usually has some big components in it. One is burnout, and that's just work stress that has gotten just into overload. Our staff work so hard here, and then ultimately even the most capable of people could end up just getting to a point where they're just tired and they're having trouble keeping track of their lives. And so what we do is we provide a safe space for them to talk about what they're going through. And people also have their lives at home. We all have our unique histories of loss and trauma. And as much as we maybe don't want to, we bring those into work with us. So we help people sort that out and then guide them to next steps of whatever support they may need. And then we also help them with coping skills. So a lot of times with work stress, your limbic system is in overdrive, your fight or flight. And so you don't really really think about it at the time because it's a slow roll, but then suddenly you're living your life in fight or flight and your cortisol is always going, your adrenaline, you never shut off. So we help people learn things like deep breathing exercises, stretching, things that help your body calm down. And we do this by actually with the help of community support and donors, we've been able to get resources for them, like the Calm app, where it helps them fall asleep at night. It helps them meditate. It helps them be mindful of who they are in the moment of their stress and how to navigate it. And then we also share other resources, like we have a newsletter that we create to add a little bit of silliness and then also acknowledge the people that that work for us and really just kind of humanize, in a building that is mostly focused on animals. So we make the humans here think about themselves. And then also, any sort of moral distress, just as with caregivers for their pets, staff who are caring really take losses very seriously. And perfectionism is certainly a personality trait in this industry. And so thinking that the outcome didn't turn out how you wanted doesn't mean you didn't do well or that you didn't do right by this patient. It just means that you didn't have control over ultimately what was going to happen. So we help people put that in perspective through things like debriefing conversations where they can think about ways that they actually really did help and how much they did mean for those really tough situations. So that's kind of an overview of how we help staff. I'll take the next slide, please. And so I'll be very quick because I think we have to, I'll skip this story just so we can get to the Q&A. Innovation and the future of social work in the vet med industry. First thing is just figuring out how to insert more veterinary social workers into this world. Right now, I think in New England, maybe we have about 6 that I know of, and 2 of them are here. And I think the more people that are inserting the human side to animal medicine, I think will help with empathy and connection. It'll help maybe with more in-depth conversations. And I think it will also help with grief and loss when somebody can really take the time through interventions like dignity therapy in thinking about their life with their pet and looking at everything they did for their pet and how much their pet brought to their lives and help them be okay or accepting of when it's time for their pet to pass and hopefully take away some of the shame and guilt that inherently comes up while making these decisions. And we do this in ways that have come up here, which also makes this one of the just such an amazing place to be is, we've been able to talk, with NBC News. We've been able to be a part of people writing textbooks on narrative medicine in veterinary medicine. Things like that, and working with the community, working with people like in talks like this who are spark an interest or see ways that their own knowledge or skills could be a part of this. And so I think it's part of it is about seeing what you have around you and joining together and figuring out how to improve things and how to make things better. So that's most of what I have. I thank you so much for listening, and I'm ready for the conversation.
Julie, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We're going to get to the questions. There's a lot of questions. Before we do, I'll just remind everyone that this presentation has been recorded, and the recording of this presentation, along with Julie's slides, will be available on the website, mspcagivingday.org. So do check that out throughout the day, and watch and rewatch and share as you can and as it's helpful. Julie, wondering if you can say a bit about anticipatory grief. For those of us who have a beloved pet who is quite well and not sick, but we tend to catastrophize a little bit about what that's going to mean for us. Can you take a minute to help us understand what causes that, and what can we do on a day-to-day basis to not have it be such a monster in our head?
That's a really good question. And I think it certainly could take a very long conversation. But I myself have also had those thoughts. And I think part of it is being aware that it's happening to you, because and you're right, it can happen even when your pet is perfectly healthy, because they're so important to us. The thought of them not being there is incredibly painful. So so I think part of it is a little bit of an acceptance of just acknowledging to yourself that yes, my pet is going to one day pass away. And when that happens, you know, telling yourself about how, letting yourself think about how it's going to feel, and telling yourself, or like, I guess what the word would, preparing yourself with the coping tools that you may have in the future. But as with anything, if we live our day-to-day worrying about what may happen, we don't get to appreciate what's right in front of us. So I would say first, gauge what your reaction is. If it's something that feels unmanageable, certainly reach out to a pet loss counselor or any sort of counselor that is going to understand what that means to you, because it's super important for whoever you're talking to and being vulnerable to, that they are going to be in it with you and understand where you're coming from. So, so certainly if your worries are becoming hard to handle, talking about it with someone who can point out like more like, I don't want to say rational, but they can help you rationalize that your fears are more about what you can't control or what you're worried about in the future that may or may not happen, and help redirect you to enjoying your pet with who they are and where they are in this moment. And but I do think that is a very real fear, and I think some of that is also just overall in general in society, we're not allowed to grieve, or grief has its own little timeline, and we don't think about death until it's right there in front of us. Mm-hmm. So I think working on an acceptance that it will happen one day, and letting yourself be in the moment with your pet is kind of the short answer. But I'd be happy to talk more about that, because I think that is a very important thing that we all struggle with.
It's helpful just to have your perspective. Thank you for that. Lots of questions about grief and all of its various flavors when it comes to losing a pet. First anniversaries can be particularly tough. Do you hear a lot about that from people who thought they might be doing okay, but then that anniversary rolls around? Yes,
that the anniversaries are so incredibly painful for people. Sometimes it brings your grief right back to where you were. And one of the things that I truly believe is that when you start to feel like that, well, number one is, you know, when an anniversary is coming, right? So you can figure out how to take care of yourself ahead of time and be prepared to do that. So whether if it's letting a friend know that that anniversary is coming up in a few days and that you want to distract yourself with them, and maybe have a good friend to just spend time with, or come up with a way to honor your pet on that anniversary. And so I think it's acknowledging that you are going to feel like that, and being okay, and knowing that that's going to happen, and it's going to pass, and knowing in advance how to take care of yourself in that moment, and being prepared for that.
Helpful. Some folks are talking about the stages of grief, right? Particularly one we don't talk a lot about. If we don't talk about grief generally, which is anger, right? I'm not feeling shame or guilt. I'm feeling anger and unfairness. I had my cat adopted at 10 years old, cancer at 12, and now gone within weeks after diagnosis. Our heart goes out to the person who offered this question.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's really hard. Anger. How do we talk ourselves away from that? Shift that toward a healthier emotion?
You know, there's different ways. I think anger can be really hard, because it's a protective emotion, right? So a lot of times anger comes up because of something else we're feeling underneath, whether if it's the unfairness of what happened. And sometimes people will even start to lose faith. If you're a spiritual person, sometimes it's hard to even feel like there's, say, a God or whatever you believe in, to let this happen to your baby and to you. So I think if you're finding that your anger is dominating your thoughts, if it's dominating your well-being, certainly talk to somebody, a counselor, about it. And I think cancer, having done oncology social work, is such an awful disease, and it takes our loved ones from us when we're not ready, and it is a very traumatic experience. So I would also say, be curious about your anger. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think if you can remove yourself from the anger a little bit and take a look at what's making that happen, you can have an honest conversation with yourself about what's going on behind that, and figure out how to honor your baby that you lost, and not focus on the end so much as what your life was like with them before they passed, even if it was such a short amount of time. And I am so sorry for your loss. It's a difficult place to be in. So there isn't always the right answer for that. But certainly, we could talk to you if it's something that's really, affecting your life.
It's very helpful, Julie. In the 1 minute we have remaining, we've got one more quick question for you. So many people have great questions. They're big questions, and they're going to need a little bit of time. So if it's okay with you, Julie will send you some questions over email that we can then get out to the folks who are asking them here. Absolutely. But before we turn it over to Neil, in the minute we have remaining, the bereavement group, that's very popular, of course. Is that open to people whose pets were not clients at Angell? Are they open, for instance, to like volunteers at Angell or people who just know us? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, our group is open to anybody that is experiencing grief over an animal. We are a community organization, and I think this is, in my opinion, this is the one way that we can really, one of the big ways we can support everyone, and that is being open for whoever needs this help, because peer support is so important, and it really helps you get through the difficult times when you know that everybody else out there is feeling the same way. It's a really powerful thing. So yes, absolutely.
Glad to know that. Julie, thank you so much. Neil, over to you.
Julie, I'm going to say thank you too for an amazing presentation and conversation. It was truly a privilege to have you share your insights with us. So thank you. And friends, I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that you learned more about our good work and about yet just one component of the mission of our organization.